I'm H.E.Comstock, and I'm a retired dentist, and I have lived here in Winchester for a number of years. I have written a book on the art of Shenandoah Valley pottery. I just fell in love with the whole thing after doing the book, and then I decided to do it myself. What I've evolved into is a ceramic folk artist, making things, most of them out of my own mind, and then I make copies of stuff from early historic potters. But I always change it a little bit. I never make it exactly like it was done. Shenandoah Valley has one of the largest and best pottery traditions in the United States. One of the reasons we got so many potters is the clay completely under the valley, and it's good pottery clay. Another reason is this was a very agrarian society through here. Many Germans came to the valley, also many English, but many of them were farmers. And of course that society needed ceramic utilitarian work, the crocks and the pots. And that lasted up until the early 1890s when the jars and the cans started coming out. People who collect pottery, they like things that are different. And in Shenandoah Valley, that's the place you find it. A lot of the potters went the extra mile and made little toys and flower pots and umbrella stands and animals and various things like that. Most of the potters were not trained to do that. They did it on their own. So we can call it folk art. Over the years, these things have become extremely collectible. The value has become enormous. The collectors have really built the desire for Shenandoah pottery. I had a very good friend who, when I was in dentistry, he moved here and wanted to rent space from me in my office to practice orthodontics. Dr. James Kaiser. He bought a big mansion outside Winchester, and I went out to visit him one day, and he had his guest house was just full of crocks. And I thought, what is all this? And he said, well, I collect them. I said, well, tell me about it. He told me about it. We spent time talking about it. And it just sounded interesting. And I started buying crocks. In 1972, I was at this sale and bought this crock, or the jar. Actually, it's a jar. And I paid like $35 at that time. And now the thing is probably worth close to $10,000. That shows that I was happy when I was buying pottery. I've gone to well over 3,000 auctions in my life, and it's in my collecting time. I was to an auction, this piece was under the table, and I recognized what it was. In fact, it was signed. It wasn't hard to recognize. And the auctioneer went on to another table, and I said, there's a piece of pottery under here, are you going to sell it? He said, oh yeah, and he pulled it out. He held it up, he says, how much I get for this little piece of Mexican pottery? And it was made right here in the valley. So I bought it for $3. And today I could get $22,000 out of it. I consult with a lot of museums. I've consulted with Smithsonian, and I've been in court many times as an expert witness. Of course, once you write a book, you're an authority whether you want to be or not, you know. This is the book that I wrote on the tradition of Shenandoah Valley pottery. This lion on the front is the epitome of the pieces of pottery that were made in Shenandoah Valley. It is owned by the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in Winston-Salem. One of the reasons I originally got into making folk art pottery because I wanted a copy of this. At one time, I had lined up here by the table, I had 28 lions that I had to throw away because I didn't like them. And because I kept on, I just had to have a certain thing come out the way the original looked. Finally, I got one. Anyway, those 28 lions, they're buried someplace outside, and I'm not going to ever tell anybody where they are. Maybe 200 years from now, someone will dig those up. I wanted to do something in pottery because of my book, and it had gotten into my soul, I guess. When I built this house, I had this built because I knew I was going to do something. At that time, I wasn't even into pottery. I thought I was going to do woodwork. But then when I started going into pottery and liked it so well, I realized it was going to become a studio. I got a ceramics degree from the local college in the early 1990s. So I've been working here in this studio since 1998. You can see I was a dentist, and so I'm using all my dental tools, which is a great advantage because I can carve clay really well in that I know how to use those little carving tools. All dentists know what that is. That's called an explorer. You use this all over the place. When you're checking people's gums, when you're checking their cavities. But this is one of the best carving tools I have. I can do, and when I come to things that are very, least little pressure will break it. I can really lightly carve it with these tines. Of course, this is the one that I use most. This is my carver. In dentistry, it was used carving fillings, and also they use this in the lab, in dental lab, to carve wax and that sort of thing before they cast crowns. The fact that I was a dentist and had all the skills and my finger muscles and everything were toned to do carvings and so forth, it has helped me out, and I've been able to produce some stuff that most people would not be able to produce. Others can, but most would not. I dig my own clay. I go to the Shenandoah River and I dig my own clay and I purify it. What I do now is let it dry, and then I have to pound it up into dust, and then I mix it back with water again, and I put it through strainers to strain all the rocks and things out of it. And once it's dry enough, then I make it into balls and store it. I go to Chinese restaurants a lot, and I prevail upon those owners to let me have some of the containers that they send soup and things out, because they're airtight, and I can use them and put a piece of wet clay inside them with a little wet paper towel. I can leave that thing for a month and the clay doesn't dry it out at all. Everything I make, I try to relate it either to folk art in that it has been made, only put my own emphasis on it, or relate it to folk art as I see it. Like, for instance, I have made Punch, the folk art puppet. I have done a Adam and Eve. It took me a month. Came out great. It was just what I wanted. But when I picked it up to put it in the kiln, a piece of it fell off because it was so dry, and it just wasn't supported enough. So that's the heartaches of doing this. This piece right here is one of the first pieces I made. This front is a copy of this right here, which is a front end of an antique stove, which was made in 1768. So these early stoves were what you found in Virginia and Pennsylvania and every other place. Here was a chance for me to use my dental instruments to carve these down and carve it to look like the real stoves. Here's a picture of a little man that you may see, a little object, and everybody that collects pottery in the valley and around here wonders what happened to that little fella and where he is, and we don't know. Here is my answer to him. I measured the height of that structure in the photograph by measuring the clapboard on the side of the building, so I knew how tall he was. So anyway, I wondered why he was this tall, but the photograph from the Smithsonian showed that this is actually a storage place. You can hide your whiskey bottle inside it. It was very difficult to make it. It took a while, but it turned out okay. Pleased me anyway. This is the line you saw in the book. The museum, Mazda, decided to call this line Winchester because he was found in Winchester, Virginia. This is Winchester 2. And then I have made a smaller version of this for my grandchildren, actually, and they're Winchester 3. So anyway, this was extremely difficult. Had a lot of trouble getting it together right, the way it was made. And that's what I wanted to do, just put it together exactly the way it was made. This is a copy of a piece of pottery made by Anthony Weisbacher. He came here from Germany. It is a very rare piece, and I always liked it. Of course, I probably will never be able to get one. So a lot of these things I've made for myself, and they'll always be with me. The potter, when he made it, it was all black, and I felt like it ought to have a little more color. Anthony Bacher also made a goat, and there's only one of them known. This one is glazed really almost like Anthony Bacher would have glazed his, but I made the base a little more elaborate. He used a rather simple piece of clay down there to set the goat on. This was a piece I mentioned earlier. It's Punch from Punch and Judy's show, the puppet show. I put Punch on the top of a bear riding, and he's got his jug. And in the back I have written, Punch rides bareback. So that little play on words, sort of helps identify a piece like this. I believe that clay ought to be marked on. If you got a piece of clay that doesn't have some decoration on it, you've failed. My main goal in making folk art this way is just to make it. I enjoy doing it. That's my primary goal. I always tell everybody, if people don't buy my ware, I've got 7 grandchildren, so I know where it'll go. But generally, I'm to the point where I just enjoy playing in mud.